Hey guys, this is Mike, LetUsReason.com. We know that throughout history, God has always preserved his people, and oftentimes in the most unexpected places. And according to many Bible prophecy scholars, one such place, a place that's very ancient, that's carved into the red rock of southern Jordan, might one day play a vital role in end times events, and that place is called Petra. In this video, we're going to explore the prophetic reasons why many people believe that the Jewish remnant fleeing from the Antichrist persecution during the Great Tribulation, or the latter half of the future 7-year tribulation, are going to find refuge out in the wilderness, in the desert, in this ancient cave city of Petra. We're going to walk through the key scriptures, we'll examine the geography of the area, and we'll go through the reasoning of why this does seem to be the location that's hinted at in the Bible. We'll talk about much more than that. So as we get started, first, why Petra? What is Petra and where is it? Well, like I said, Petra is an ancient city that's carved into the rock in the modern day country of Jordan. And it has, for a long time, fascinated historians, archaeologists, and theologians because nobody really knows who originally carved it. The conventional historians are going to say that the Nabateans did in the 1st century BC. And I'm sure that they did add, at least, to what was already there stylistically. But I'm not sure that they were the original builders or carvers. So who were the Nabateans? Well, they were an Arab people who inhabited northern Arabia and the southern Levant, or the area of modern-day Israel. And they had conquered the earlier inhabitants of this area around the 5th to 6th centuries BC. The earlier inhabitants were called the Edomites. If you know your Bible, I'm sure you're very familiar with who the Edomites were, the descendants of Esau. So was it the Edomites then who originally carved this cave city? Possible. But my personal speculation is that it went back even further to a mysterious biblical tribe called the Horites or the Horim. And the book of Genesis mentions a figure named Seir the Horite, who was the chief of the Horites. And it was after him that the whole area then became named, especially Mount Seir, which was a mountainous region mentioned in the Bible repeatedly, located south of the Dead Sea. Now, what's interesting, and this is completely sort of a separate study to what we're going to talk about today, but since we're sort of on this subject, is that there's a good case to be made that the Horim either were a clan of post-flood Nephilim giants or that they at least had some association with them because they're routinely mentioned alongside other giant clans in the Old Testament, in Genesis really, that the Bible explicitly calls giants like the Emim, the Zamzumim, and others. So like I said, that's another study of its own. But it may have something to do with the incredible creation of these cave structures. I think it's interesting to note also that the etymology of the word Horite, the term Horite or Horim itself, may actually have to do with those who dwell in a cave or a hole. This is pretty commonly known. And basically the word troglodyte. So it's possible that the Horites were the cave dwellers that originally carved this, or that Seir himself was a cave dweller, so that the name Seir the Horite simply means Seir the cave dweller. And then it became sort of just associated with that tribe. So that's sort of an off-topic speculation, but I just want to throw it out there because we're on the subject of Petra, which is a famous cave city located in the Mount Seir mountain range in ancient Edom. Now, Esau, the brother of Jacob, of course, eventually married into the Horim line and eventually displaced, or his descendants sort of displaced or took over that area. And in later times, Petra became a Roman trade city after the Nabateans. And so it was then long abandoned and finally rediscovered in the 1800s. But from a strategic standpoint, the location is very compelling as a sort of a hidden secret fortress. That's basically one of the least accessible places on the earth, but definitely in that region, and very easy to defend since it's accessible only by a narrow passageway known as the Siq, S-I-Q, that goes on for about a mile and really can only be reached on foot or on horseback. And it's surrounded by very high cliffs, and it's really shaped exactly like an ancient sheepfold. or a sheep pen, I guess you would say, where it sort of bottlenecks at the entrance. So it's easy for the shepherd to get the sheep in one by one and count them, but it's very hard for the sheep to then get out because of the bottleneck construction. And it then widens up once you get into it. And that point of it being sort of like a giant sheepfold is something that we're going to talk about later. Very key point to all of this. So it's naturally fortified, it's hidden in the desert wilderness in the mountains. And these qualities of concealment, isolation, and defensibility really make it an ideal place for protection, or somewhere to hide out if you're being chased. But in Bible prophecy circles, Petra takes on a even greater significance because of this. So according to the Bible, the Jewish people are going to one day face a terrible time of persecution in the future tribulation period. And the Old Testament contains numerous prophecies about a time of intense suffering, just incredible distress for Israel in the last days, a period that's commonly understood by many scholars as the Great Tribulation, the latter half of the final 7-year period of time that's foretold in Daniel 9:24 to 27, the final phase before the Messiah's return. And during this final 3.5 years, the Antichrist is going to break a covenant and unleash terrible wrath against Israel. And Israel's going to face severe persecution from many nations who are going to be led by the Antichrist. He's going to sort of create this coalition against them and force a remnant, a righteous remnant, to flee for safety into the wilderness. And the book of Daniel is actually one of the most detailed Old Testament prophetic texts about the end times, as we know, but it provides us with a lot of the information about this subject. So, for instance, Daniel chapter 12, verse 1 speaks about the worst time of persecution for Israel in history, but that a righteous remnant will be saved. And it says this: "And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people," of course, Israel. "And there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book." Well, we know that the angel Michael is the heavenly protector of Israel who arises during a time of unprecedented distress or the tribulation, showing that Israel will be under severe threat by all these nations, by the Antichrist, but also under divine protection. Now, another key passage is Jeremiah 30, verse 7, which says, "Alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it. It is even the time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved out of it." So we see here that speaking about this future time, Jeremiah here also says that it's going to be the worst time ever for national Israel. There's none like it, he says. And he calls it the time of Jacob's trouble, which obviously refers to Israel. Jacob was Israel. His name was changed to Israel. So it's an idiom, but it's referring to the nation of Israel. And it's a reference to how in the last passage, it also says that they're going to be saved out of this time. But another passage that also helps us to really recognize just how bad this time is going to be is Zechariah 13:8 to 9, which says, "And it shall come to pass that in all the land," speaking of Israel, "saith the Lord, two parts therein shall be cut off and die, but the third shall be left therein. And I will bring the third part through the fire, and I will refine them as silver is refined, and I will try them as gold is tried. And they shall call on my name, and I will hear them. I will say, It is my people, and they shall say, The Lord is my God." And so again, the time is so terrible that it says 2/3 of the people in the land are going to die. But again, it refers to a remnant, a 1/3 here, it says, that are going to survive, and they're going to be purged through the fire, and they are the righteous remnant. And to really understand this context even more fully, I would recommend that you just go ahead and read through Zechariah chapters 12 to 14 on your own time. But I'm just going to give you one more here, and it's from Zechariah 14. And verse 2 says this: "For I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city shall be taken, and the houses rifled, and the women ravished, and half of the city shall go forth into captivity, and the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city." So it speaks of a future siege of Jerusalem at the end of the tribulation during this terrible time of persecution, and that's really going to force a righteous remnant to flee to the wilderness, which I'll show you as we continue. This is just a small taste of the scriptures that we could point to. The Old Testament is just incredible. It's absolutely full of these kind of prophecies that speak about the end times. It tells you exactly what's going to happen, basically. And it's a shame that really most of us don't know our Old Testaments very well. We don't hear about this in church too much. And so really, this is going to be a horrible time for Israel. Yet, just as he did in the days of Moses, God is going to once again provide a wilderness refuge, a place of protection for his people Israel. And a lot of scholars believe that Petra, what we've been talking about, fits the prophetic and geographic profile of that place perfectly. So let's start to walk down this road a bit further and just understand, again, why Petra? So one of the earliest scriptural clues comes from the book of Daniel, chapter 11, verse 41. And in that passage, we see that it describes the Antichrist invading what it terms the beautiful land, which of course is a reference to Israel. And many countries fall to his power, but interestingly, not all of them do. And the verse reads as follows. It says, he, in the most ultimate sense here, being typical of the future Antichrist, shall enter also into the glorious land. So I said beautiful, but this translation says glorious, same thing, the land of Israel. And many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom and Moab and the chief of the children of Ammon. All right, so it tells us that three areas, three geographic regions, which used to be three nations, are going to somehow be able to avoid falling to the Antichrist. And these three regions are Edom, Moab, and Ammon. And they're all located in what's today the kingdom of Jordan, the country of Jordan. And Petra, well, it's right in the heart of ancient Edom, located near Mount Seir, the former home base of Esau, as we said, and the Edomites. And it's also by an ancient site called Basra, which we're going to talk about more. And the very famous Bible teacher, Dr. Arnold Fruchtenbaum, points out that this verse not only predicts the Antichrist's military conquest, but also outlines a divinely protected zone. He writes as follows: while the Antichrist will conquer the whole world, three nations will escape his domination: Edom, Moab, and Ammon. These three ancient nations currently are part of the single modern kingdom of Jordan. The city of Basra in Mount Seir is located in ancient Edom, or southern Jordan. Since this area will escape the domination of the Antichrist, it's logical that the Jews will flee to this place. All right, so then this is our first really strong clue that Petra may be the chosen place of refuge in the wilderness that the Bible speaks of. But there's other clues also, and some very general and some a little bit more specific, that are also going to help us recognize that Petra probably is going to be that location. So next, if we fast forward now to the New Testament for a moment, we see that in the famous Olivet Discourse, Jesus provides a chilling warning to his people who are living in Judea at the end of the age when this happens. And he says this: when ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. All right, so this goes back to what we just spoke about. The abomination of desolation refers to the Antichrist desecrating that future Jewish temple. And the Apostle Paul also talks about this in 2 Thessalonians 2:4, where he says that the Antichrist is going to sit in the temple, apparently the holy place of the temple, according to what Jesus just said here in Matthew 24. And the Antichrist is going to act as though he's God, seeking to be worshipped, obviously desecrating the place. And Jesus said that when this happens, tribulation saints, the righteous remnant in Jerusalem at that time, should flee to the mountains. He spoke of it in the future tense, and it's pretty obvious what mountains he's talking about. And remember, all of this is connected to the time of Jesus's second coming, which obviously has not happened yet. So then this abomination of desolation, this final event, which is connected to it, also has not happened yet. But again, it's pretty obvious what mountains he's referring to. The mountainous terrain that's directly east of Jerusalem across the Jordan River. And it contains this region of Edom, especially as you go south. And within it, this fortress city of Petra, as you go further south. It's a real place. It's hidden in the mountains. You can actually go there and visit it today. It's an incredible trip. I'd love to do it one day. And it's consistent with Jesus's literal warning. And so we know that the righteous remnant is going to flee to the mountains. And that would definitely confirm Petra as a very strong possibility. Now, for the next clue, we're going to have to go to Revelation chapter 12. And this is a chapter that details the entire saga of this dramatic situation in a very interesting way. And it does it through John's symbolic vision of a woman, which we know represents Israel, which is clear because the imagery is defined for us all the way back in Genesis 37. And she's pursued by the dragon, which it explicitly says symbolizes Satan. But we see that God protects her. And I want to show you what verse 6 specifically says. It says this, and the woman fled to the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. All right, so the place in question that Israel is going to flee to during the latter half of the tribulation, or that final 1,260 days, or the final 3.5 years, is specifically said to be a place in the wilderness, which means the desert, which of course Petra is. And it's said also to be a place that God had allowed to be prepared ahead of time. So in other words, that the place is already ready and waiting for them. It's some kind of fortification that they don't have to build for themselves. So keep that in mind. Now let's look to verse 14. It tells us even more. It says, and to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time from the face of the serpent. All right, so the woman was given, as it says, 2 wings of a great eagle to fly with great speed into the wilderness, where God will nourish her or feed her. Now, just as he fed the Israelites with manna in the desert in the book of Exodus, he's going to again sustain her supernaturally. And if you really read through these passages, there's a lot of connections sort of typologically between the Exodus from Egypt and this final protection in the wilderness in the end times. So it associates this with a place where she's going to be fed. But the wings of the eagle is a pretty interesting statement. And it's a reference all the way back also to the Exodus from Egypt. And it refers to the way that God sort of supernaturally gave the Israelites almost a superhuman strength and speed and endurance when they left Egyptian bondage. And one example that you can see this at least being referred to is Exodus 19:4, where God says, ye have seen what I did unto the Egyptians, and how I bare you on eagle's wings and brought you unto myself. And there's certainly a lot more passages that you can look into that talk about that. So the location that Israel is going to flee to is a place that's been prepared ahead of time by God, and a place that Israel is going to be given the ability to escape to quickly. And it's a place where God's going to nourish or feed her for the latter part of the tribulation. So that's 3.5 years of supernatural protection in a wilderness location that's prepared ahead of time by God. So Petra, once again, perfectly would fit this profile. Now, the next point involves a location called Basra that we mentioned before, that's mentioned a number of times in the Bible. Isaiah 63 gives us a picture of the Messiah at his second coming, and he's not coming from Jerusalem, but he's coming from Edom, specifically from Basra, which is a city that's just a few miles from Petra. And this is an amazing prophecy where Isaiah is speaking as a watchman on the wall in Jerusalem, and he describes prophetically seeing the Messiah approaching the city. And he describes his garments as being bloodstained from all the carnage after he destroyed the enemies at Basra. And he asks who this figure is, who approaches as a watchman on the wall would. And then the figure actually answers him. It's an incredible passage. It says this, who is this that cometh from Edom with dyed garments from Basra? This that is glorious in his apparel, traveling in the greatness of his strength. I that speak in righteousness, mighty to save. Wherefore art thou red in thine apparel, and thy garments like him that treadeth in the wine fat, or stomps grapes in a winepress? And then the messianic figure answers again, I have trodden the winepress alone, and of the people there was none with me. For I will tread them in mine anger, and trample them in my fury. And their blood shall be sprinkled upon my garments, and I will stain all my raiment, or my clothes. For the day of vengeance is in mine heart, and the year of my redeemed is come. Isaiah 63, 1-3. So, of course, this day of vengeance refers to the future eschatological judgment phase of the day of the Lord, or the end times when the tribulation is a subset within that. So, this is a very powerful image of Jesus returning to rescue his people and defeat his enemies, starting in Edom. Now, why would the Messiah come from Basra, which you basically have to pass in order to get to Petra? Basra would be between Petra and Jerusalem. So if he was returning to Jerusalem from Petra, that makes perfect sense to say, who is this that I see coming from Basra? Because he's coming from that direction. And so that would make perfect sense if that's where the Jewish remnant is being protected. And the language of this passage should also remind you of another passage, Revelation 14:19-20, which says, And the angel thrust in his sickle into the earth, and gathered the vine of the earth, and cast it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trodden without the city, and blood came out of the winepress, even unto the horses' bridles, by the space of 1,600 furlongs. And so it should also remind you of Revelation 19, which pictures the return of Christ as a warrior and as a conquering king who utterly defeats his enemies. Now, we're not going to read that passage. You can do it on your own, but let's talk a little bit more about Basra. So Basra is a big key in this whole topic. It's a big time clue. And Basra was an ancient Edomite city that's located in what today is southern Jordan. Now, historically, it was a chief city of the land of Edom, sort of a capital. It was mentioned several times in the Old Testament. And Petra, on the other hand, is located in the same region as ancient Basra, southern Edom. While Petra's not the exact same city as Basra, it lies within the territorial region historically called Basra. So when we see this, some of these references, who is this that comes from Basra? Is it talking about the city itself or the ancient region? It doesn't really matter, because the point is both of them would be kind of between Petra and Jerusalem. And so geographically, it would be perfect for Petra to be this place where the Lord returns to first to rescue the remnant who's been hiding there. So, many scholars feel that Petra is either part of greater Basra geographically, or that it's very close to that ancient city. So whatever it is, it really seems to fit what we're talking about here. So when the Bible refers to the Messiah coming to Jerusalem from the direction of Basra, or delivering his people from Basra, it would make perfect sense that Petra, being that most fortified and secluded location in that area, is where the remnant of Israel are going to be gathered and protected for the latter half of the tribulation. So I hope that makes sense. Let's go a little bit even further into this now. So what does the name or the word Basra itself mean? And does it have any connection to Petra, and indicate any clues as to how this word is being used in the Bible to refer to Petra? Well, the actual term Basra is related to the Hebrew word for sheepfold or enclosure. So the Hebrew word, the root word batsar, and it means to enclose or to fortify. So in the Hebrew mind and language, Basra became a symbolic image of a sheepfold, a place where a flock is enclosed and protected. And this becomes especially significant when we consider an additional clue that also links Petra as being the location where Israel, as God's flock of sheep, are going to be sheltered during their time of tribulation. This concept really sets the stage for Micah chapter 2, which uses very vivid imagery of sheep being penned up in a fold, awaiting their deliverer. And the context is the future day of the Lord. And it says this, I will surely assemble, O Jacob, all of thee. So again, it calls Israel Jacob. I will surely gather the remnant of Israel. So again, it speaks of the remnant. I will put them together as the sheep of Basra, as the flock in the midst of their fold. They shall make great noise by reason of the multitude of men. So it's going to be a lot of people. The breaker is come up before them. They have broken up, and have passed through the gate, and are gone out by it, and their king shall pass before them, and the Lord on the head of them. Micah 2:12-13. All right, so let's break this passage down a little bit further. So, Basra as a sheepfold. Well, in this passage, Israel is seen being gathered into a sheepfold that it calls Basra, which many identify with Petra because, again, it's the same geographic area and it's a secure, enclosed location that resembles a sheepfold that bottlenecks at the entrance and opens up on the inside where they're kept safe from a time of danger. We also see the mention of the gathering of the remnant of Israel, as I mentioned, which is God bringing together this righteous remnant during the tribulation. So it's a clear reference to that. But then what's interesting here is a term that we may not initially be familiar with, but it's the breaker. And this is the Hebrew word paratz, and it's a messianic title that refers to the one who breaks them out. It says the breaker goes up before them. The Messiah is portrayed as a deliverer, breaking open the gates of the sheepfold and leading them out after it's over, when he comes back to rescue them, destroy their enemies. If you had any doubts about this, it restates this a little bit more clearly for us in modern English, as it says, the Lord at their head. So it's a clear picture of the second coming with Jesus leading the remnant out. And this scene occurs just before the return of Christ to Jerusalem. You can look back to Zechariah 14:4, suggesting that Petra or Basra is where the remnant is gathered in this sheepfold like sheep when their shepherd returns. And this is why, then going back to Isaiah 63, Isaiah, as a watchman on the wall in Jerusalem, sees the bloodstained Messiah approaching the city from the direction of Basra after his second coming, where he apparently goes to Basra first, or the area of Petra, to rescue the remnant of Israel from that sheepfold after they had fled to the wilderness to escape the persecutions of the Antichrist. And I'd like to share with you another quote from Dr. Arnold Fruchtenbaum regarding this. And he says, the name Basra means sheepfold. An ancient sheepfold had a narrow entrance so that the shepherd could count his sheep. Once inside the fold, the sheep had more room to move around. Petra is shaped like a giant sheepfold, with its narrow passage opening up to a spacious circle surrounded by cliffs. Now, I'd like to share with you one more Old Testament prophetic passage, and this is one that a lot of people overlook. In fact, I wasn't even aware of this until recently. But I do think it also is speaking about this event, although the language you're going to see is a little bit more cryptic, and the geographic names don't explicitly say Petra, Basra, Edom, or even Mount Seir. And yet it also speaks of the similar location, although slightly north of it, in the land of Moab, which was located just above the land of Edom. And it also mentions a place called Selah, which is just north of Basra in Edom, or later it's mentioned as being in Moab because the borders kind of changed a little bit. But if you pay close attention to the details as I read through this passage, you're going to see that it seems to be describing the remnant of Israel in their flight to the wilderness to escape the Antichrist, as they make their way to what we now believe to be Petra. And it seems that they escape through this northern area of Moab because Moab, again, is above Edom and it's more directly to the east of Jerusalem. So it would make more sense for them to escape from Jerusalem to the direct east and then south to Edom, down to the area of Basra and Petra. So it says this, send the lamb to the ruler of the land from Selah by way of the wilderness, to the mount of the daughter of Zion. For it shall be that as a wandering bird cast out of the nest, so the daughters of Moab shall be at the fords of Arnon. Take counsel, execute justice, make your shadow as the night at the height of noon. Hide the outcasts, do not betray the fugitive. Let my outcasts dwell with you, Moab. Be a hiding place to them from the face of the destroyer. Isaiah 16:1-4. That's the modern English version. Now, I think it's interesting that this passage began with a mention of the lamb being sent through Selah, which is right above Basra, to the wilderness, which is where Petra is, given our discussion about Basra as the sheepfold. It just seems interesting that a lamb is mentioned here. Although most commentaries are going to say that this is something to do with sending a tribute of a lamb. And I do admit it's very cryptic, and yet many scholars and study resources do associate this passage also with the future escape to Petra in the end times. As we continue through this passage, we see that it then gives the impression of almost like a midnight escape, using language like make your shadow as the night at the height of noon, hide the outcasts. It says, don't betray the fugitive. Let my outcast dwell with you, Moab. Be a hiding place to them from the face of the destroyer or from the Antichrist. Oh, and the mention of the fluttering birds being pushed out of the nest is also very telling. I want to share with you what one commentary said about this. It says, this phrase evokes a vivid image of vulnerability and displacement. Notice these words here, vulnerability and displacement. In the ancient Near Eastern context, birds were often used as symbols of fragility and helplessness. The imagery of birds being pushed out of the nest suggests a sudden and forced departure. This can be seen as a metaphor for loss of security and stability. The Bible often uses bird imagery to describe people in distress. For example, Psalm 11:1 and Matthew 23:37, emphasizing their need for protection and guidance. And so when we consider all these things, the passage does seem to carry a lot of themes and language that would seem to relate to the escape of the remnant of Israel to the fortress of Petra during a time of distress. Now, I will say that when you read through this passage, you get the impression, especially in the beginning, that it's Moab who's an outcast and who's on the run. But then it clearly pictures Israel that way. So I want to share with you another quote from a commentary by David Guzik on Blue Letter Bible. And it says the following about this verse. It says, let my outcast dwell with you, O Moab. This is a sudden and curious change of focus. In Isaiah 16:3, Judah was counseled to receive the outcasts of Moab. Now Moab is asked to receive the outcasts of Judah. Bultema, a scholar, thinks that Isaiah 16:4-5 is an end times prophecy of how Moab will be a place of refuge for Jews, escaping the fury of the Antichrist after the abomination of desolation. In a coming day, Israel will flee from the fury of the Antichrist and will find refuge in places like Moab. And he cites Revelation 12:6 and 12:13-14, what we said before, that these locations will avoid the control of the Antichrist. And he continues, they will be protected from the face of the spoiler until devastation ceases and the oppressors are consumed out of the land. So I know this verse may be a little bit more confusing than some of the others, which are a lot more straightforward, but that's sometimes the nature of Bible prophecy. And we don't know exactly how things are going to play out in the future. Maybe in the beginning of this campaign, Moab will turn to Israel for some sort of protection. And then as it continues, Israel will seek protection as they travel through Moab to reach Petra. Of course, Moab referring to Jordan. We don't really know how it's going to play out. Sometimes things have a near-term application in Bible prophecy. Maybe there was something near-term back then. I got to look more into it. But then also there being a far-term ultimate fulfillment in the future that would come to ultimate fulfillment during this time of eschatology, the end times. But we can clearly see the connection here to the topic of this video, I think. And so I think this passage is also one that we should not overlook. Certainly we should look more into it, but we shouldn't overlook it. So as we get ready to wrap this up, we can see that throughout the scriptures, God has always preserved his people in times of trouble. He protected Noah in the ark. He fed Elijah by the brook. He sheltered Israel in the wilderness after the Exodus. And in the final days of the tribulation, it appears he's going to do this again, perhaps in Petra, the rock fortress in ancient Edom. So in the end, God's promises remain. He's not going to abandon his people. In the darkest hour of human history, in that future time, there's going to be a light in the wilderness. And perhaps that light will shine from the red rock walls of Petra. And the themes of God coming as a shepherd, regathering his sheep Israel, the remnant of Israel after his second coming, really continue throughout the Old Testament. It reminds us of the incredible faithfulness of God to his promises, so many made to Israel throughout the Old Testament. And if we can trust the promises he made to them, then we can trust the promises he's also made to us. Jeremiah 31:10 refers to this Old Testament regathering of Israel as a shepherd gathers his sheep. And it says, "Hear the word of the Lord, O ye nations, and declare it in the isles afar off, and say, He that scattered Israel will gather him and keep him, as a shepherd doth his flock." And so Basra as the sheepfold and Petra as its physical representation beautifully illustrates the prophetic storyline of divine shelter, messianic deliverance, and covenant fulfillment. The remnant of Israel, once scattered, are going to be gathered. Once vulnerable, they're going to now be protected. And once hidden, they're going to emerge triumphantly, led by the breaker, the Lord himself, as he returns to the city of Jerusalem to continue his day of vengeance against his enemies. I hope you guys found this interesting, and hopefully I was able to shed some light on this topic for you. I want to thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this teaching, please give the video a like and leave a comment. Make sure you subscribe. Don't forget to tune in the future for more content like this. So God bless you all, and I'll see you on the next video.